an evolutionist. In fact, in one of the classes, this was really going on for quite some time. This one student, he actually had good arguments, but I kept dodging and twisting and, missing it and so on as the evolutionist. And finally he said, well, he says, I'll see you in the parking lot after class. Now, that's not 1 Peter 3:15. And so we need to be trained in these particular areas. But what about natural selection? Sometimes I'll say to students, well, it's obvious evolution is true. I can prove it. Look at the world around about you. Is there variety in the world around about us? Boy, there sure is. Think of all the different kinds of cats and different kinds of dogs and horses and turtles and everything else. All the different kinds of people. There's lots of variety everywhere you look. That's what Darwin noticed on his voyage around the world. Is there a struggle for survival? And the answer is yes, there is. Most of it notice it Monday morning. Okay, there's a struggle for survival going on. You see all the nature films and things eating each other up and chasing each other down, and lions pouncing on zebras. Okay, there's struggle for survival all over the world like that. And that's what Darwin noticed when he sailed around the world. Lots of variety, lots of struggle. Only a few would ever survive. Well, what do you call a few that survive? The fittest. So variety plus struggle equals survival of the fittest. Evolution's a fact. What if I say it that way to you? By the way, if you don't hear it from me first, you will hear it from a teacher in school someday. Just 1, 2, 3. And they might say something like, no wonder Christians are so stupid. They can't even count to 3. Their faith has blinded them to the simple facts. There is variety. There is struggle. Obviously, some are more fit to survive than others. Evolution's a fact. What's the problem? What really changed? Okay, let's think of a couple of examples. Like the Darwin's finches. Okay, and so when Darwin landed in the Galapagos Islands, he saw some of these little birds called finches had little teeny beaks, and they caught insects for food. Some of them had great big beaks. And by the way, I want you to know there is nothing wrong with having a big beak. Okay, just keep that in mind. And the ones with the big beaks lived on islands where there were lots of seeds to crush. How did Darwin explain the origin of Darwin's finches, we call them? Answer, the same way a creationist would. Said, when I was sailing around South America, in the jungles of South America, I saw lots of finches. Some had little beaks, some had big beaks. He started with what? Variation. Okay, he says, then a storm must have washed a mat of trees and logs and vegetation down the river, and there were some finches on this mat that got washed out to sea, and it crash landed on the Galapagos Islands. Is that possible? Yeah, it really is. You can get mats of vegetation 600 miles out the mouth of the Amazon River. They'll have little birds and lizards and things like that clinging to them. They land at the Galapagos Islands, what? The birds with the little beaks survived where there were lots of insects to eat because they could move their head real fast and catch them. The birds with the big beaks survived where there were lots of seeds to eat. So notice nothing changed into anything else. Natural selection doesn't tell you how one finch changed into another finch or how a reptile changed into a bird. It doesn't tell you anything like that. It just tells you that if you have lots of varieties of a given kind, as they multiply and fill the earth, they'll break up into specialized subgroups. Well, that's what the creationists were saying 24 years before Darwin published Natural Selection. It had been published earlier by the Christian Englishman Edward Blyth. It's just part of what would happen as things multiply and fill a fallen world where death plays a role now. The peppered moth in England. In the 1850s, it was mostly the light-colored moth. It was camouflaged during the day. It would fly around at night, rest on the trees during the day. And while the birds were looking for something, they couldn't see the light-colored one because the tree was covered with lichen. But the dark-colored one stuck out, and so the birds ate that one. And so the population was 98% light, 2% dark. Pollution kills the lichen, soots up the trees. Now the dark form is more camouflaged. The light form is more obvious. In 100 years, the population changed from 98% light to 98% dark. Evolution going on today? That's what I used to tell my students, and I used to look at them. How can they be so dense? How can they still believe the Bible when you can just see evolution like that? Now I realize what they were thinking is, how can the prophets be so dense? Why can't he see that it's just the moth? The moth didn't even get a new trait. the finch didn't even get a new trait. It didn't change from one thing to the other at all. Just the percentage of survivals in that area changed. As a matter of fact, God didn't make no dumb creatures. A lot of the moths didn't stay around to get eaten by the birds. They moved on to a forest where their wing color matched the background. They can actually sense what wing color they have. No evolution whatsoever. And so what Darwin discovered was not evolution. What Darwin discovered was how plants and animals multiply and fill a fallen world, moving into different environments that match the characteristics that they have that were sorted out from the characteristics that God gave their ancestors. Nothing at all to do with evolution. Natural selection, yes, in a fallen world. Evolution, not at all. Not even close, not even relevant. Next slide. And I just mentioned the finches. Those are the pictures of those finches. Next slide. And all of the examples that I used to use to prove evolution to my students, none of them were examples of evolution changed from one kind to another. All were just examples of variation within the created kinds. Next slide. What about new species? So the first debate I was ever in, somebody pointed out at the end in question time, well, evolution's a fact. He says, one of our researchers right here at the University of Texas, or where Texas A&M, don't want to get those mixed up over there, but was in Hawaii. And so there used to be, just one species of